Clash, the price of protecting the arts. In the interview, Monika Grütters from the German Parliamentary Committee on Culture.
Europe and North America want to grow closer economically, and talks are underway aimed at creating a major free trade agreement between the EU and the US. But there's one conflict right from the start, and that's the question of culture. The Europeans are worried that culture will be trampled on if it's treated as a commodity in global free trade, so they want to keep culture out of it. Ms. Grütters, why make an exception for culture?
Because of the dual character of culture, which on the one hand provides a service and is recognised as a legitimate commercial good, but on the other hand must be protected as a carrier of core cultural values. And these values should not be sacrificed for the sake of commercial interests and market liberalisation.
Germany and France are the driving force behind this demand, but there are many more countries in the EU. Are countries working together closely behind the scenes, or is everyone acting to protect their own interests?
As far as culture is concerned, they're working together because culture only makes up 2% of the volume of trade between Europe and America. Each country on its own would make only a marginal contribution, so they do work together on this issue. But France and Germany are indeed the driving force behind efforts to exclude culture from the free trade agreement. Here in Germany, government support for the arts and the idea of culture is so strong that we tend to overshadow the other European countries, including France. Germany is the country with the biggest concentration of theatres. 10 times as many people go to museums than to all the Bundesliga soccer matches combined. A new book is published here for every 1,000 inhabitants. Half of the world's orchestras play in Germany. So we have more to defend here than fiscal trivialities. And we're concerned about the whole picture and not just single economic sectors like film subsidies.
The Americans, as well as the British government, see culture as more of a commercial product or a competitive product. That's why they accuse the Europeans of distorting competition by calling for a cultural exception to free trade. Don't they have a point? Culture is, after all, a commercial activity.
People in the arts are aware of the advantages a free trade agreement would provide, and they defend it on those grounds. But this is really about the 2% of values that don't have a chance of competing on the market, because they are troublesome forms of expression that provide a critical corrective to society. Especially in Germany, culture is anything but affirmative. And that's why we subsidise it here, so it holds a mirror up to society and makes us uncomfortable at times. It's this cultural diversity, the spirit of culture, that shapes Germany, that we are defending here. But that doesn't mean we're uninterested in improving conditions for the creative industries by doing away with trade barriers. That goes without saying. Creative industries are one thing, and the spirit of culture as a defining element of Germany's national culture is another.
Culture without subsidies is unthinkable in Germany. Just look at the German theatre scene with its 150 to 160 theatres. Every seat is subsidised to the tune of 100 to 150 euros. Every ticket. What would happen if these subsidies dried up?
Germany lives off the richness of a legacy left behind by the old principalities that split Germany up into many small principalities. But at the same time, we're trying to promote an element of avant-garde, and that requires adequate state funding. We also believe that by encouraging artists and intellectuals to take the lead in our culture, that is avant-garde at its best. A history of 2 dictatorships has taught us that it's our duty to immediately confront any kind of totalitarian impulses. And the best way to do that is to let free spirits roam by offering them such things as government-funded social insurance for artists, special tax arrangements and copyright protection, as well as other tax advantages that make them feel less constrained. This free-thinking element provides our society with so much diversity. We believe it has eliminated any dictatorial or totalitarian impulses that could now threaten us. That is what we are defending. A substantial amount of our highly subsidised cultural life is dedicated to remembering and working through our troubled past. And all of that would be eliminated or ignored if we didn't try to protect our funding of the arts from liberalising tendencies.
Many of these free thinkers are found in the literature scene. Literature production in Germany has long been supported by price-fixing agreements for books. Is this now threatened?
Yes, I believe that fixed book prices are under threat. That's true for the domestic market in Europe and throughout the world. But of course, this is a concrete point of negotiation in a free trade agreement. The wide variety of high-quality literary publications offered by so many publishers in Germany is only possible because of cross-subsidization with bestsellers. And if it all ended up like any other business, many of these small publishers that devote themselves to high-quality literature would go under because they could no longer afford the cross-subsidization. If big sellers like Amazon no longer had to comply with barriers and fixed book prices, especially on the internet, that would be the end of diverse and high-quality literature in Germany. There's no other country that publishes one new book for every 1,000 inhabitants. That would be seriously threatened.
Since we're talking about publishing, let's discuss copyright laws. They're also threatened by digital media. The film industry, the press, of course, and the music industry have all been battling piracy. What can the cultural exception to free trade do here?
We strongly defend copyrights here in Germany. We know that artists and creative people need to be able to live off their services, and that means we have to make their work accessible and make sure they get paid for what they do. But this self-service mentality on the internet, along with the big commercial machines, starting with Google on up to a bookseller like Amazon, represent a real danger to the livelihood of many artists here. So in that respect, our copyright laws defend the role of the authors, artists, creators and intellectuals. And that's true for the sciences as well. We still have a lot to do in that area, and things look very different in other countries. But the various parties within Germany are not always in agreement here.
Critics of the cultural exception to free trade say it would merely create a breeding ground for subcultures that are only accessible to elites. Shouldn't the arts be judged by their success?
That's what we do every year when we pass a new budget. And by the way, our cultural committees do nothing else than ask whether the services that we subsidise and make possible with taxpayers' money are justifiable. But I have to add that we have an average capacity of 84% at the more than 800 venues in Germany. That is certainly positive feedback, and it can't be the result of elites alone. On the other hand, most of our funding goes toward cultural education, and we shouldn't forget how important that is. People are entitled to such benefits. If 10 times as many people visit museums than go to all Bundesliga soccer matches, that justifies putting barely 1.7% of tax revenues into funding for the arts in Germany. It's no more than that. And yet we still have a national culture that the world recognises.
The concept of a national culture comes from the 19th century, before Germany was united as a nation. Back then, language and culture was seen as uniting forces. But does Germany still have this view of itself today? Do we still care about having a national culture in the age of globalization and digital media?
I spend a lot of time in other countries, especially as a representative of German culture. And it's always been the case that people are downright envious of us Germans because of the variety of our culture. The quantitative variety, of course, but also the aesthetic variety. We are seen as a country where the Made in Germany label does indeed make us a valuable trading partner. And we do have a good reputation for the quality of our products. But the second characteristic is our national culture. People see and respect the serious way we deal with our past. They respect our transparency and the ruthlessness of our self-criticism. But people have also learned that by defending the major freedoms, the freedom of opinion, opinion, artistic expression, religion and freedom of assembly. More than almost any other country, Germany has set an example when it comes to democracy. And that is how our national culture expresses itself today. The number of our theatres is one thing, but these are the building blocks of our freedom. And it's our job to protect them by making our artists independent through state subsidies, independent from sponsors, independent from the latest trends and tastes. They don't have to try and please everyone with their work. Instead, they are actually encouraged to throw a light in our society, to make us reflect on things, even if it makes us feel uncomfortable.
Sondern sie werden geradezu ermutigt, uns etwas vorzuführen, was unsere Gesellschaft ausmacht.
Only by doing this have we overcome our past and regained our standing in the world, following the collapse of our civilization during the Third Reich. And that's what I mean by our national culture.
Ich glaube, darum geht es beim Begriff der Kulturnation.
That was a clear answer. Let's end with a look to the future. The issue of cultural exception has been provisionally removed from the free trade negotiations. Does that mean the sword of Damocles is still hanging over the arts?
I would say it does. We are now in the preliminary phase at the start of negotiations, and that's why many business representatives are saying you can't start off by creating a taboo. But we say if we don't do it now, it will get even more difficult later on. First of all, we're only dealing with 2% of the trade volume. But the identity of our society is also involved, and that's why it has to be possible. These are not tactical games we're playing here, but rather the fact that 14 culture ministers wrote a letter to EU negotiators saying that this cultural exception applies to all of us. And that will be carried into the next phase of negotiations with great seriousness. I'm grateful to France for energetically insisting on the cultural exception, which it did in agreement with its economics minister. In Germany, we're still carrying on with the classic conflict between the economy here and culture there. But in the end, I'm sure that our community of shared values will win out over mercantile interests.
Thank you for talking to us, Ms. Grütters.